what is the purpose of our workshop? So I need to say that through the review of the success and current state of treatment of cultural heritage objects, which will be presented by our experts, the aim is to outline some of the main features of radiation treatments of cultural heritage objects with special consideration given to crisis conditions, by which interaction among the conservators, conservation scientists, restorers, and radiation technologies will be enhanced. We hope it will be useful for all professionals in the field of protection and conservation of cultural heritage, and to encourage them for further acceptance and use of these advanced techniques. Irradiation of cultural heritage is an intervention conservation method that is fast and offers a number of benefits if used appropriately. Today, you had the opportunity to learn about the basics of the method from the invited lecture by the expert and our dear colleagues Valentin Moise. This afternoon, you will hear more details from the presentations that follow, but before them, what should you keep in mind when considering the possible use of radiation for cultural heritage treatment? Prevention, reduction, or elimination of damage to cultural heritage collections and archives is effectively carried out by ionizing radiation, especially in case of disasters or catastrophic circumstances in which the risk of damage we know increases exponentially. Radiation treatment can be applied as a preventive intervention. Radiation treatment has numerous advantages against conventional disinfection techniques because it's based on the fact that gamma rays are universal biocide that penetrates through most materials. Radiation treatment is temperature independent, non-contact method which leaves no residues and does not induce radioactivity. Radiation treatment doses are selected according to biocontaminant type and depending on the materials that constitute the object and its states. And finally, after the treatment, irradiated objects pose no risk to restorers, curators, or visitors to the cultural heritage collection or archives. This workshop we dedicate to Dr. Dušan Ražem in memory of our long-time leader of the laboratory. Dr. Ražem was an excellent scientist. His research has been associated with all aspects of the effects of ionizing radiation on matter, radiation chemistry, dosimetry, and technology. He got involved in the basic radiation chemical research or water radiolysis. He has played an active role in various fields of radiation applications like food irradiation, radiation treatment of pharmaceuticals, and cultural heritage artifacts. His achievements in radiation processing, establishment, and development of radiation technology in Croatia are both nationally and internationally acknowledged and recognized. He had numerous activities in national and world regulatory and advisory bodies, but it should be noted that he was responsible for the establishment and upgrading of the ISO standard of the ethanol chlorobenzene chemical dosimeter, who discovered in our laboratory and which is in use in many countries over the world. Last but not least, he paid significant attention to sharing his knowledge with the younger generations. His memory will live in our hearts forever, both as an excellent scientist, a highly cultured friend, and a wonderful person. Now, it is my special honor to introduce our wonderful speakers, colleagues, and collaborators all over the world, the experts who have knowledge and great success in heritage prevention using ionizing radiation. We look forward to sharing with them their latest results and success stories. Let's start with the presentation of your host. Let me introduce the first speaker, my colleague, Dr. Katarina Marušić. Katarina Marušić has been working as a research associate in the laboratory for radiation chemistry and dosimetry. She is working in the fields of material science, radiation chemistry, and electrochemistry. Among her topics of expertise is application of radiation technology for preservation of cultural heritage. She will present an overview of recent examples of the application of radiation technology for the protection of artworks and cultural heritage in Croatia. Katarina, the microphone is yours.
Good afternoon. Today I will give you a brief overview of how we in Zagreb implement radiation technology for protection of cultural heritage. I will show you through a few stories how we treat this subject. First, just to mention that our group comes from the Radiation Chemistry and Dosimetry Laboratory, which is part of the Ruđer Bošković Institute. And our lab has a panoramic cobalt-60 irradiator. Our laboratory has been using radiation treatment of cultural heritage for almost 40 years. And during these 40 years, we have treated more than 10,000 cultural heritage objects. On this large picture, you can see our irradiation chamber. On the right, the metal cylindrical object is where the cobalt-60 sources are placed. And we perform the treatment in the sense that we place objects around the irradiator and on a specific position depending on the conditions we want to obtain, and they are kept in this position for a certain period of time, depending on mostly on the infestation of the object. A question that is usually asked by conservators when they come to us is how much we can treat and how long is the treatment. So in our case, we can treat simultaneously up to 6 cubic meters of objects or goods. And the process lasts from 1 to 3 days in our case, depending on the type of infestation. So during these 40 years, of course, our collaborators have grown. We have many corporations, many institutions that work on conservation, and starting with the Academy of Fine Arts, the National and University Library in Zagreb, Croatian State Archives, Croatian Conservation Institute, but also very many museums. The ones that are mentioned here are just the museums that are that come more often to us, but many others, as well as galleries, private collectors, and private conservators and restaurators. So now I would like to go through, let's say, 3 examples to show you how we approach the different situations that we find ourselves in. This first example would be a standard procedure. This is most common in our case. It is an example of the parish church of the Holy Cross in Rasinja, where the 2 side altars and the pulpit were attacked by woodworms. The church was in function during the whole time. They tried previously to treat the objects with gas, but the process was unsuccessful and the woodworms weren't stopped. So the chief conservator that took over decided to send the objects for radiation treatment to our facility before doing their conservatory work. So we performed the disinfection process, and after the treatment, the objects were sent back to the conservator, and they did the work that needed to be done. And after that, the objects were placed back, returned back into the church where they are today. This is the most common example. It's an everyday situation. A similar situation is that we like to mention is the example of the wooden chapel of St. Martin in Stari Brod. This was the work on conservation and restoration were awarded by Europa Nostra Award in 2017. This specific case is very interesting because the whole church is made of wooden panels, so it was possible to dismantle the entire church and bring it to our facility for treatment prior to the rest of the conservation works. The second type of example is slightly different. It is in the case where the infested cultural heritage objects are kept in unfavorable and uncontrolled microclimatic conditions. This example is of the Church of St. Francis Xavier in Bojana. You can see the church was in a very bad shape, as well as all the wooden inventory inside the church. So the conservators sent the whole wooden inventory to our facility. The inventory was in bad shape. It was not only woodworm attacked, but it had a mold on it. So the treatment that we performed needed to be slightly different. We had to apply a higher dose. And after the treatment, the objects were sent back to the conservator, which performed the rest of the process. And when everything was finished, it was not actually possible to bring the objects back to the church. So they needed to find a temporary storage for them. It was decided that the objects will be kept in fire department close to the church, where they waited for the church to be conserved itself. The building had to be in good shape for the inventory to be able to go back inside, for the infestation not to go back. Such situations we had many experience before, especially during the Croatian War of Independence, but I won't talk about this. I will let my colleague Branka Katušin-Ražem talk about this topic in the next lecture. The third type of example is our intervention in case of natural disasters. This example is in a case of a flood. This was in the Diocesan Museum's storage room, where overnight the water pipe bursted because it froze. It took 12 hours for someone to notice that there was a flood. And during this time, it was enough for molds and fungi to develop on the objects. A very big additional problem was that most of the sculptures were packed, as you can see in the pictures, in sponge, and over the sponge in cardboard. This was done to prevent mechanical damage, but when the flood occurred, it made the situation a lot worse than it would have been. So the objects needed to be taken out, unpacked, dried as fast as possible, and then again folded in plastic foil for protection and sent to us for urgent treatment. The point in this case was to stop the further development of fungi and molds. So once we irradiated the collection, it was possible to keep it stored somewhere and wait for one by one to be restored. Examples like this, unfortunately, we had recently again. It's in the case of the Petrina Earthquake. Due to the earthquakes last year, many objects that were containing cultural heritage were damaged, and so it was decided to have a central depot for temporary storage for the damaged cultural heritage objects, or some were not damaged, just the buildings were damaged. And all the objects before placing them in the temporary storage are still being sent to us for treatment. And after the treatment, they are placed in the temporary storage. In this case, we're doing it to prevent potential cross-contamination if something is infested. Maybe it's not even seen from the outside. So at the moment, we are treating a large collection of ethnographical objects. So all of these activities that we had in this field in the last almost 40 years, due to them, our laboratory has been involved in the first publication, the International Agency for Atomic Energy sponsored and published. and the publication was quite successful. So today we have a new publication in progress that we are again involved in. Thank you for your attention.